So, segueing into economics from our conversation last time,
Yeah.
I want to talk to you, or I want to kick us off with talking about abundance and scarcity.
Okay.
Okay, so for me, breaking down economics into its finest, most nuanced, simplest point is economics is an environment where there is scarcity. Because without scarcity, there's no need to economize. Economics economize, right? So imagine the Garden of Eden, for example. Well, there's an abundance of everything. There's no need to economize because you have everything you need
Yeah.
at any given time. For everyone. So if there's no need to economize, there's no economy. Therefore, there's no economics. So we were talking just a moment ago about Kashmir.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kashmir is a very interesting place because it's very resource rich.
Yeah.
And it's surrounded by a certain group of people, neighbours, let's call them, that don't necessarily, from a belief standpoint, all agree on the same thing.
Yeah.
And I believe that's just a cover up for the bigger picture, which is there's this little plot of land in the middle that's resource rich, and they're all trying to necessarily get their teeth into a certain amount of those resources. So we could continue that conversation.
Yeah.
So first of all, if you give me the rundown of Kashmir, what's there, and the surrounding areas, as in who's in the surrounding areas, and what do they want from it? From a resource point of view, but also what are they? How are their ideologies different from the neighbours around them? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So I don't know that much about Kashmir, but I know that it's been fought over. Famously, it's on the periphery of both Pakistan and India.
Yeah.
Both of which do not like each other, I think due to numerous reasons, but one of the reasons is the religious differences. Indians are mainly Hindu, Pakistanis are mainly Muslim, and their first conflict sort of was born out of the British occupation being lifted from when it was the British Raj of India. After World War II, we gave them they had their independence, and the Brits wanted to get out as soon as possible. And they separated what was the British Raj of India. They separated that into 3 or 4 states. You had India sort of in the middle, and then on the edges of both of those you had what is now modern day Pakistan. It was then called West Pakistan, I think. And then on the east of it, which is now Bangladesh, that was called East Pakistan. And the basic principle was all the Hindus will go into India and all the Muslims will go into East or West Pakistan. And in that sort of traversal, they were given like a very short amount of time. I think it took maybe a year, perhaps, or a few months.
Yeah.
But in that, I think 1 million people died because the conflict brew up a load of ethnic tensions and religious tensions, and about 1 million people died in that. It was very, very terrible because they were transitioning from, they just got told, right, you're a Muslim, go over there, you're a Hindu, go over there, go, that's it. It was a bit lawless. But Kashmir was different.
Why did we pull out of India?
We pulled out of India because we needed to rebuild. We were absolutely, on our arse after World War II.
Right.
And
so we needed everything, all of our resources out of India.
Yeah, all the people wanted to go home and sort of, it had been a very traumatic time, and I'm sure we probably promised them independence if they fought for us. So I think Gandhi was a big movement leader there, so I think he sort of galvanised the pressure to keep to their promise if they ever made a promise, which I'm sure they did. Probably didn't expect to fulfill it, but
yeah.
And there was also a lot of pressure from like US and Russia to decolonialise as well, so that probably influenced things. But yeah, the Brits just rushed home. But Kashmir was different. They sort of decided not to do anything. They decided we'll leave it be because there's a little bit of Hindu and a little bit of Muslim in there anyway, and then a bit of Pakistani there. We'll let them do their own thing. And I think they.
Yeah. What was the beef between India and Pakistan then?
India, Pakistan, it was, to my knowledge, certainly religious.
Okay.
Because the states were divided by religious lines. They were, all Hindus are in India, all Muslims go to East or West Pakistan. You have like a few months or a year to gather your belongings and go. And that was 1 million people died, I think, or 1 million people moved, something like that. I'm not too good on the stats, but a lot of people died because they would like check trains and say if you're Muslim, for example, then the radical groups would kill you. It was quite simple as that. They would check whether they were circumcised or not.
All as a result because we pulled out.
Yeah,
we left it
and
and
we,
so we've got a lot of control over not just India but Pakistan as well.
Yeah, it was all bundled into one. It was all just called India.
It was all just called India.
Yeah.
Okay.
Under the Brits, yeah. And Kashmir, we just decided to let them be.
So it really was a religious separation.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
where
yeah.
the conflict came from between those two nations.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure there were some other things as well which contributed, but the main sort of principle was religion. And Kashmir, they decided.
And what was Kashmir? Sorry, what was Kashmir at this point?
Kashmir was under British.
It was
British
also
India.
under British India.
But
Okay.
they decided to leave for whatever reason. Decided to leave that up to the people to sort out.
Yeah.
They were like, we'll just leave it. We're not going to get in. We need to go home. We'll leave it as it is. And I think it was a Muslim or Pakistani majority nation, which was then ruled by like a Hindu leader of sorts, like a king or religious leader. And quite naturally, seeing what happened in India, and I guess sort of like all residing tensions between the two different groups, the Muslim or Pakistani majority did not want to be ruled by a Hindu leader. And so I think there was something where they called in Pakistan to liberate them and join as Pakistan, but then the Hindu leader said, look, Pakistan is invading, help to India, and that's where you get their first war, first of 3 official wars, I think.
So again, that's Pakistan and India.
Yeah, over Kashmir. And China's up there as well, but they've not been as famously involved. They have border skirmishes with India, like I said before. They have like a demarcation line with India across borders where they don't bring in conventional or heavy weapons like assault rifles and mortars, for example. But they'll still have border clashes mostly every year, where a few people will die just through like garden rakes and maybe machetes and other, well, it's essentially gardening tools and anything you can pick up in a household, really.
Sure. And so a lot of conflict there.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
a lot of it fueled by, we'll call it religion, but it's different belief systems, different ideologies, whatever.
Yeah.
Let's talk about resources. So how resource rich are the different areas? And we'll start with Kashmir, but
Yeah.
we'll talk about the others as well. And what resources do they have?
I don't know. It's quite frankly, but I do know that.
Veering off history.
Yeah. Resource-wise, I don't know too much about Kashmir. I know it's resource-rich, but I don't know what in. Kashmir is quite famous for its silk, I think, so maybe it's something to do with that. And
Yeah.
I would imagine it's the minerals that it holds within the sort of mountainous area that is Kashmir. I wouldn't say oil or gas or anything like that. For energy, certainly, I don't think it's energy-rich, but I do think it's got like precious minerals, perhaps.
Okay.
Other things could probably
Enough
use
to
in
keep the
manufacturing.
surrounding bigger players interested.
Yeah.
Bigger neighbours interested.
That's a very good way to put it. Yeah.
Okay. So what? So you what we were also talking about earlier was trade routes. Trade
Yes,
routes
yeah.
between-
Yeah.
What did you call it?
The Silk Road.
The Silk Road. Okay.
Yeah.
So break that down for me. Break the Silk Road down for
So
me.
the Silk Road, quite frankly, is a trade route between Asia, China, and Europe. And I think it has its roots back to the Mongol empires when because they had the biggest continuous land empire in the world. The Brits didn't get close to it at all. They basically conquered Asia and went quite far. They were verging on Europe, I'm pretty certain. I think they maybe even went to like Turkey or somewhere.
Who's this?
The Mongols.
The Mongol. Okay.
Yeah, so you think, what's his name? The Khans. They ruled the Mongol Empire. So they established it, I think, because they were quite famous for their trade routes and their horse travelling as well. And China basically wants to bring that back, a sort of arc to the greatness of the past, being used to sort of, in the modern context, to enrich its current status quo. And they've been trying to do that through the Belt and Road Initiative, which is it's like an international infrastructure investment fund, where they'll give a loan.
with trade, sure, and and economic growth,
Yeah.
sure, but also with control at the end of it.
Yeah, because the loans will be, they're usually not, they're not offering, let's put it this way, they're not offering the loans to the West. Italy's a different thing. But they're not like going to the UK and saying, we'll build HS2 and that will be a good travel link, because China doesn't get anything from that. Because they'll build like ports and rail and stuff which benefit China, which is understandable between two parties. One party will not offer another one without being in some sort of benefit. I think that's
So-
business 101.
Any infrastructure, separate infrastructure, for example, shipping ports in various countries,
Yeah.
but it has to in some way benefit China.
Yeah, and I think on the surface at least, but the real reality is these loans which they give these countries to then pay China to do the infrastructure, like paving the roads and building the ports and airports and other infrastructure. These loans are given on very unfavourable terms to these countries which are vulnerable to them, so they're usually the poorer nations in Africa. Mozambique is one, Sri Lanka was another.
And they take them on based on
Yeah.
It's just we'll figure that out later.
Yeah,
But it's an
yeah.
opportunity we can't pass up to have.
It's probably like the government's just looking for a win in the press, something to quell the masses from their rampant corruption or some, scandal.
And it would
War.
provide a lot of employment.
Yeah.
short-term.
Yeah, on the surface of it, but really the loans are unfavourable. They're never able to pay it back, and then China, as collateral,
Repossess.
they repossess what they built, the port, the railway, whatever, and it's essentially it's kind of like a business. I tried to make a term then, but it's like the
Go on.
businessification, or it's like colonialism, but you make not colonial. You do make money from colonialism, but yeah, they've done it in a bit of a sort of a sneakier way, rather than we're just going to send our army. It's we're repossessing an asset which you failed to pay us on. But the terms were always set up to be like that. So.
And how does having a port in Sri Lanka benefit China? I'm guessing that's got something to do then with India.
Yeah, they're able to mess with India and its trade routes, or the trade that goes between Sri Lanka and India at any given point, because they could probably put PLA boats in that port and then cut that strait.
Yeah.
People's Liberation Army,
Okay.
or PLAN, People's Liberation Army Navy. It's the navy of the army of China. China's army is called the People's Liberation Army.
Okay.
So if anyone refers to like PLA army or whatever, or the Red Army, it's usually China.
Okay.
It's just a Chinese army, and they'll send like the PLA navy there, and they can cut it off at the moment as well. Same moment's notice. China's navy
Does
isn't
the PLA
great.
have that much reach?
They're trying to.
Yeah.
They're trying to. They're not.
My
the greatest.
understanding is they've got a lot of vessels, but not necessarily any of which with a long range.
No, they've got enough range to go to the Middle East, because they've got some destroyers there at the moment. With what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, with the terrible sort of shit that's going on in Palestine right now, and because of the ramifications of other stakeholders and regional and world players, China's got involved. They've got a ship there. The United States have sent its biggest carrier group in the Med there.
Well, doesn't a lot of, if not almost all of their oil come from Saudi Arabia?
Pretty much, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it definitely serves them to have a military presence.
Yeah,
For
yeah, because
shipping security reasons in that region, especially with the American so-called slowly but surely pulling out of that space militarily.
Yeah, but I think what we see there is when the United States wants to pull out of those regions, it's a bit short-sighted, because then who fills it? They usually don't set it up in a good way. The United States, we saw in Iraq, do not do nation building well, if at all, and we saw it.
Quite the opposite.
Yeah, because they pulled out. Iraq had a civil war in which Iran's proxies essentially won, and so Iran is a heavy influence in Iraq now because of that, expanding their regional influence and detracting from the United States influence there.
Well, maybe they don't need to, and this really is me talking
Yeah.
in terms that I don't fully understand here, but maybe they don't need to, in as much as, it's safe to say that the United States are resource rich.
Yeah.
They have what they need to survive. Through globalization, which they set up,
Yeah.
they've become dependent on other nations for a few things. It'll hurt, but it's nothing that's going to ruin them.
Yeah.
They can ultimately survive by themselves. So would you say that it's, if a country helps build other nations.
Yeah.
It's in their interest to do so. Like, for example, it's in China's interest to do what we've just talked about.
I think
because they
yeah.
import so many resources.
I think that relationship is the other way around. It's in what was the statement you said again? It's in their interest to build that nation.
Well, yeah.
I reckon it's the other way around. They'll build that nation if it's in their interest. Because,
that's what I mean.
Yeah. So the
Americans.
Yeah,
the US has no interest in building a shipping port
in Yemen, for example.
For example.
Yeah, unless Yemen has something it wants, and building a port is a very good way to get it out. For example, oil. That's why
something you can control when you repossess it, when you underwrite loans that just can't possibly be paid back.
Well, the United States, it's a bit, I guess, a little bit controversial, but the United States and the sort of status quo power that is like those multinationals, the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations. The United States does, I think it is quite fair to say, the United States do have quite a sway. The power is meant to be distributed, but because of the alliances the United States has, and the power of those people in those of the powers in the alliances, they have a particular sway whereby they can use those sort of neutral levers to get what it wants internationally, whereas China can't. Which is why if China is trying to do the imperialism from like the United States is doing, it has to be a bit more sneaky with loans and shit, rather than it has to be bilateral rather than multilateral through a supposedly neutral what's it called, organisation like the IMF or the World Bank or whatever. Because as a condition of getting help from the IMF and the World Bank, you have to fit certain criteria which are in the interest of the United States, the West, the major players in those organisations, who will eventually benefit from it.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
just going back to your point on Iran as well, with the United States, you know, I can't remember what it was, but the reason bilaterally between Iran and the United States, it probably isn't in the United States' interest to, or it doesn't matter that Iran has a hold in Iraq, but it matters between, it matters to the United States' main ally in the region, Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia and Iran are regional powers trying to influence the wider Middle East. And if Iran usurps or beats Saudi Arabia, then Saudi Arabia can't give oil to the United States. So
it doesn't give much. Not now, at least, doesn't it?
The interesting thing is the United States has been thinking about this to the point where they've been trying to court Venezuela, who have the world's biggest untapped oil reserves past Saudi Arabia, and they've been trying to court them because of what's going on in the Middle East, because they can't get that oil. Literally, this was last year at some point, because of what was going between Israel and Palestine and what was going on through the Strait.
I hear there's a lot of work going on between, I say a lot of work, call it what you will, but there's stuff going on between the US and Venezuela.
Yeah.
But what do you know about the shale revolution?
The what, sorry?
The shale revolution.
Oh, is that to do with like shale oil?
Yeah.
I've heard of it, but I don't know anything of substance.
It comes back to my point where the US, I keep saying the US is self-sufficient.
Yeah. Is it?
Well, I'm not an expert, but that's, let's assume through various means that the US is self-sufficient. It becomes an oil exporter as opposed to an oil importer.
Yeah.
Then their interests, certainly in the Middle East, their interests certainly change.
Yeah.
Let's just imagine for a minute that they didn't need any resources. I don't know how much they take now. I don't think it's much, but let's just assume it goes down to zero. And that's a very different world as far as the Middle East is concerned, right?
Yeah. Yeah. United States don't bother.
Yeah. So who's militarily then who's the dominant force between Iran and Saudi Arabia? Who would control the Gulf basically?
Probably Iran.
Probably Iran.
The Iranians are a lot more experienced than the Saudis.
They have a lot of money.
The Saudis,
yeah,
they have a lot of money. They don't really have.
Doesn't translate into.
Yeah.
Maritime power though.
But a lot of their military is run by Western contractors like BAE. For example, to the point where if the United Kingdom says we are not going to do any trade with Saudi Arabia at all, Saudi Arabia can't fly its jets because we train them.
We've got no reason to do that, right?
Money. They can pay us a lot of money and oil as well.
No, but we've got no reason to.
To cut it off.
To break economic ties with Saudi Arabia.
No. But if for example, if we did, Saudi Arabia doesn't have an air force, and then the Iranians, who do their own air force, can just go over and bomb it.
So they're quite self-contained. Again, militarily speaking, they're quite self-contained. The Iranians.
Yeah. So they have
powerful and experienced.
They are, they're basically the way to frame this power struggle between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Or another way to frame it would be who could police the Gulf after the Americans, the US depart from it.
Yeah, who would have the most influence over it? Would probably be Iran, and Iran have been trying to expand their web through covert means, through like Quds Force and the Revolutionary Guards for years, because it's kind of like they're kind of like what the French went through after the French Revolution, where all of Europe who were. Well, the French Revolution, they overthrew the king, and then all the monarchies of Europe, which is pretty much every European country, were like, oh, we don't want this idea to spread because this will interrupt, then all our powers going. All the kings and queens are like, oh, we can't have these ideas spread outside of France. We need to kill this in its crib. So they tried to invade, and that's how you get Napoleon. He was the ultimate sort of anti-status quo power because he's not a monarch, but then he goes on to become emperor and one of the greatest generals in the world. Iran is a modern day
fringe of lunatics.
Yeah.
Right.
Iran is a version of that because they overthrew their government and they put in a Shia majority cleric in charge, I think, and they were very anti monarchy and stuff, which is a massive threat to Saudi because they are the ultimate status quo power. So the Saudis do not want Iran to succeed in its goals because that presents a model of running a country which is better than theirs, whereas Iran is essentially fighting for its survival because its very existence is threatening to Saudi Arabia. Thus, the United States is a bit more complicated. They had a coup there and they don't like them. The United States is then invested because if Saudi go down, there's no way in hell that Iran is selling them any oil. They're going to sell it to Russia and China. So it's in the United States' interest to be.
Well, hang on a minute. So what relationship do Iran and China have?
Iran and China have a economic relationship and a sort of a mutually convenient one in by your enemy's enemy. Your enemy, your enemy is my enemy.
And that enemy being?
United States.
The United States. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's just say that China need and want oil from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And the Iranians police the Gulf.
Yeah.
How does that look in terms of? Do they have to? The Chinese have got to buy the oil from Saudi Arabia, but I'm guessing they've got to also buy an insurance policy or a security policy from Iran to get the oil out.
Probably, yeah. The Iranians, I would imagine, probably would try and keep the Chinese on their market. Let's say if
So it's in their interest to keep them on the. But they're not selling the oil.
The Iranians.
They've got their own, haven't they?
Iran does have a lot of oil, which is why the United States was there. But
not for Saudi Arabia. Well, for both Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, both. Yeah. They were good. They were on good terms for a while with the United States because the United States.
Iran?
Yeah, because they were like a Western-friendly nation.
And they were spending a lot of money.
But then they had a good relationship, and then the United States couped the rulers of Iran because the current ruler was a bit socialist and wanted to nationalise the oil fields and basically give the profits of Iran's oil to Iran. The United States did not like that, so they couped it with the help of the Brits and put in the Shah of Iran, who was a horrible dictator and autocrat who terrorised his people with the secret police in order to control the nation. But in doing so, because he was put in power by the Brits and the Americans, he gave them favourable oil terms. And then when I think Russia may have got involved, but they eventually overthrew him.
Conspiracy, the puppet.
It's proven. Yeah, it's proven.
It's proven.
Yeah.
Controversial is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, because the United States is meant to be this good guy, but more and more we find out about the United States and their activities in the Middle East, they have
their
not
own
been
interests.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, I'm guessing the Chinese have no chance of policing the Gulf over Iran.
They probably don't want to. They don't have the resources to do it. Their military isn't.
That's what I mean. They
reach,
don't
yeah.
have a chance of doing it. I mean, it's in their interest because a lot of oil comes out of that way towards China.
So-
Unless they've got a good trade relationship with Iran,
Yeah.
and they can then
So I
buy it
suppose.
direct from Iran.
So I suppose then, if you're China and you want oil from the stable market, and Iran probably makes more sense than Saudi Arabia if Iran, for example, funds some kind of guerrilla warfare against their ruling class, because then Iran is more stable than Saudi Arabia.
But the oil's also got to
Get there.
steam past India.
Yeah, yeah. In India, I don't think has much oil, if at all.
No, but it has a navy.
It has a navy, yeah.
So you get every ship's going to need to have police.
But if
Shipping routes between China and Iran or the Gulf, let's say, is going to need, like it does today, but it's largely provided by the US. It's
Yeah.
going to need a military escort,
yeah,
right? So with India and China not exactly getting on,
yeah.
that is a bit of a speed bump potentially.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah, I think you're on. That would make sense. Yeah. So they could close that port between Sri Lanka.
Which intercept any ships carrying oil to China.
Yeah. Yeah, but then you have a military conflict, and I don't think the Indians are very good at military conflicts, and neither are the Chinese.
Well, they have a navy.
Yeah, they have a better navy than China, I
Chinese.
think. Yeah. Although the Chinese
Well,
navy is
I
meant to be
don't-
all right because the Chinese want to take the South China Sea and Taiwan. And if they want to take Taiwan, they need a good amphibious force, which will be shot down.
What's their interest in Taiwan?
Taiwan represents a thorn in the side of the Communist Party because they had that civil war, Chinese civil war, and that was the communists versus the nationalists called the Kuomintang. And the communists won, but the Kuomintang retreated to Taiwan, and they claimed up until about the 70s to be the real China, whereas communist China was saying, no, we're the real China, as in who takes China's seat at like the UN and all those national things. The United States and the West didn't recognise communist China until the 70s, when there was a bit more thawing of relations in the Cold War. And then, ever since then, China has always said, we're going to take Taiwan, because Taiwan has historically been part of China, and it will be again, because that represents a failure.
So in the same way that the Russians say that, Ukraine is part of Russia.
Yeah, that's why it's very important to make sure that Russia doesn't succeed in Ukraine, because if Russia succeeds in Ukraine, other countries will think, they solve their problems with violence and invasion, I'll solve my problems with violence and invasion.
Benchmark
Yeah.
behaviour.
Yeah.
For global behaviour.
Especially if the West sort of poo-poo it and lose traction in 2024, we're in the beginning of 2024. Let's say they lose traction and they lose support for Ukraine because they run out, it's too expensive, they're not making that much progress or whatever, they lose interest for whatever reason. Then Russia takes Ukraine, then China will take Taiwan because they're like, oh, we can solve our problems like that as well, because we've got a problem like that and we've got a half-decent navy, so why don't we do it? And you're also seeing that in Venezuela, because Venezuela has a neighbour called Guyana, and there's a region there, the name I've forgotten what it's called, but it's very resource rich, and in previous maps it shows that that area used to be a part of Venezuela, but then due to the colonialism of the United Kingdom and Spain in that area, they were divided differently between this map, which is now officially a reference and being taught or is proposed to be taught in schools in Venezuela.
It amazes me that the world in which we live is, again, we'll call it the West, is such a thin skin over a primitive body. It really is, and it's not even a complete skin. Like, it's amazing to me that the majority of the world almost is. The world's more broken up and rife with conflict than it is together.
Yeah.
In particular today, I was going to say in modern history, but in particular today, so it's not getting better, it's getting worse. The world is more broken up than it is together.
I agree, yeah. I mean, I remember thinking...
We're not brought up to think like that in schools.
No, you think it's all dandy and all,
the
pretty
world just
flowers
gets
and
on.
daffodils.
The world just gets on, and the whole world's like this.
I remember...
But really, we're a very, very, I wouldn't say varied, but we're certainly a minority in how the real world actually works. I think, again, it's a thin skin underneath it. It's extremely primitive. Like, We, there are still tribes out there.
Yeah.
In the uncharted, world where if you enter there as a Westerner, as a modern man, as a journalist, they're going to eat you.
There's a famous island off the Indian Ocean called North Sentinel Island, and that is literally just a small island full of tribal people, and
Tribal people.
yeah, and they are uncontacted pretty much because
Uncontacted. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah.
and they are uncontacted because everyone who has tried to contact them has been killed with spears and arrows and whatnot. Like planes flew over.
But that's not a joke. It's
Yeah.
real.
And there have been people like American.
It's not like they were Westerners and then they had a choice. Like we're going to be like this. They are genuinely.
They've been like that for thousands of years and will
Yeah.
probably continue to be like that for
They
thousands
might
of
not
years.
even know. But there's probably no modern technology in there.
Well, they flew a plane over to try and get photos of them, and they shot the plane with arrows.
With arrows.
Yeah, and they put arrows through the wings, and you get these stories of like quite famous stories of American missionaries going there to bring them Jesus because I don't know they got told to, and then they're killed and like cut up for body parts.
Yeah. Do you think they're aware of us? They're
I
obviously
think they
aware of
must-
outsiders because
yeah.
we've been there.
Yeah.
But are they aware of? Have any of them secretly got an iPhone?
I don't think so. No, not unless it dropped out of that plane.
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
It is shocking when you think about it. It really, to me, it is shocking.
I remember thinking like when I was younger, like I've learned about World War One and World War Two. Not much about the Cold War, but you knew the Russians were a bit dodgy, but they're not that anymore. And you think, well, the world's all right. And then 9/11 happens, and all that kicked off. And I was 3 when that happened. I remember. So I think you're like, oh shit, this is the next big thing. But then you dive into it when you grow up because you're like, oh, they're going to fight the bad people.
The bad people.
Yeah, very generic, and
Very binary.
yeah, purposely so, I imagine. And
That's
then,
why I said to you last time, we're all drinking our own Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
My wife's Polish,
Mm.
and so I go over to Poland quite a lot, and it's interesting. It gives you perspective because you take especially when you're a child, you grow up with in your environment. You grow up in that environment. You grow up with your news.
Yeah.
Which has a point, which has a side, which has a bias, right?
Yeah.
So you assume that's not just gospel, but you assume everybody thinks that way. Everybody has that bias. You don't even realise it's a bias until you know that there's another side.
You believe in it like the sky is blue.
Like the sky is blue, and the day is light and the night is black.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not until you go even somewhere like Poland, which is so much closer to us than some of these places we're talking about.
Yeah.
And you realise, you watch a bit of their news, and they say things differently. It's not a fundamental difference in belief. Like for example, then if you went to a Muslim country, it would be vastly different, but it's different enough.
Yeah.
To realise that okay, whether it be intentional or not, we're brainwashed.
We're actually quite sheltered from realities of all that the
Well,
places that are not as well off as us.
We have our narrative, which is sold to us.
My dad was a soldier in Ireland when the Troubles were kicking off, and I would never have known anything about that until he told me and showed me the photos he took and whatnot. Because it's not taught in schools or mentioned on the news or anything. It's just sort of it's just part of British history, which is like a footnote.
Right.
But when you look into it, you're like, oh, got a lot of crap happening. It's quite bad because it doesn't paint the British in a very pretty light, like World War II does.
Yeah, and there's always conflict.
Yeah.
I mean, have you ever known there not being conflict?
There's always conflict.
There's always conflict.
I've read a stat where in the United States' entire 300, 280 odd year history, they've only been at peace for about 30 years or 20 years. Every other year
And that's
they've been
them.
fighting a war. That's just one country.
That's just one country.
Yeah.
So there's always conflict.
Well, I think we've had a 100-year war with France before. A war that lasted 100 years. I read a stat about that. That was interesting. It's called the 100 Years' War. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if it's if there's always been conflict, it's safe to say there's always going to be conflict. And again, that's another thing that I wouldn't say we're taught in schools, but where we come from, but it's certainly the notion. You hear people say the notion is, well, that can't happen today.
Yeah.
When you're having a history lesson and you're talking about things that happened a million years ago.
Do you ever hear about Napoleon and his second rise to power, where he was banished after he lost Russia, I think it was. He got imprisoned on an island in the Med somewhere, made like a governor, which is a demotion, even though he still ruled a bit of land. But he still had ambition to come back to France because they put back in the Bourbon king and he was a knob. To sort of put it bluntly, he did what French kings do, which is like spend ludicrous amounts of money on cake and food and parties, and then the peasantry were left to rot. Yeah, and Napoleon was like, well, I'll just come back and this is mine for the taking. They're not paying anyone. So he gets a boat with a group of men, which are not very subtle at all. They have a going away party and everything, but you don't have the internet, so no one really knew. Goes to France. The king gets scared and shits the bed and leaves. But like he would send like army and police forces who were formerly under Napoleon's command to go and intercept Napoleon, and Napoleon would say, look, join me, kill me. It's a very famous thing where he goes, strike me down, essentially. But then they join him and they go and they take Paris again. But you hear about that and you think, oh, it's it's all well and good.
Quite the strategist, wasn't he?
Yeah, quite the strategist, and the fact that he could just say, right, we're off to the capital, we're going to take back the country, because of certain grievances. Fast forward to June 2023 in Russia, Prigozhin
storms the palace.
Yeah, he's on his way to Moscow within a day. And Putin sends all these forces and they shoot down a command center, an airborne command center and shit,
So, it all aids my point, which is, conflict is all not taught, but it's definitely perceived, I think, where we come from. But it's a thing of the past.
It's
very much.
It's something to be read about in history, but not watched on TV.
Correct. Because it's all. Yeah. I remember for me when I was a child. Mm-hmm. My early, the war that was going on. My earliest memories of war being on the television was Bosnia.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So that's probably before your time.
I would have been like -3.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would have been 5.
Yeah.
So or maybe more, 5, 6, 7, whatever. But yeah, I always remember there being
conflict.
I've never not. Yeah, there's always been conflict. But what I remember from that is that there was very much an us and them.
Yeah.
So there's this place called Bosnia. Like we're the. I don't want to say the good guys, but we're the good people.
Yeah.
And then there's this place called Bosnia.
We're right and they're wrong.
It's not so much wrong because they were, the way I remember feeling about it was they're
the James Bond baddie.
No, they're the people that are suffering.
Yeah.
They're the people that are being.
So we told you liberators.
Right, I guess so. Yeah. But that's all a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
That's how we were made. I remember that. That's how we were made to feel in school. Like this is Bosnia. They're not from here.
Yeah.
But this is how you tell children. But they're under attack, and they're those poor people. We feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's just those words. That in its own right is very binary.
Yeah.
That's one-sided. It has a bias. I wouldn't say at the time or anything I was interested or was aware that there might be another side to this, but you just take it.
Yeah.
And then you live with that. That's your frame.
I remember when I think when the Soviet Union sort of collapsed and the Berlin Wall, when the Berlin Wall fell, I think they called it the end of history because they were like, well, nothing can happen now. This is it. And I think it was a
conflict over.
Yeah.
Conflicts.
From their perspective, but then what actually happened was the Soviet Union collapsed, and then you have Yugoslavia collapsing, and then you've got what was happening in Afghanistan in the 90s where the Taliban come to power, and then you've got the African wars as well around the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I think you had something in Indonesia as well with East Timor where there was an insurgency there, and the UN helped East Timor become a country. and there's all these other things going on, which you don't realise. Famine in North Korea, but because it's not involving the Americans and the West primarily, they're like, oh, that's it, it's over. But there's so many other things, hotspots and stuff going on. The FARC rebels in Colombia and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, really, I was really interested. No, Northern Ireland was still going in the 90s. It was in its adolescence, but it was still going. You still had, I think, one of the biggest bombings happened in '98, right, coming up to the Good Friday Agreement to try and disrupt that. Yeah, really interesting. Really interesting stuff.
So underneath all of it, then, we sort of turn it on its head.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's actually really close to air.
Yeah.
This is how we started. So scarcity and abundance.
Yeah.
There is. There's got to be only a few sort of universal and transferable reasons why we have conflict in the first place. Like why do we fight? Why do we have conflicts? I think there's more than one, but for me, I think, at least where I start, I do believe the biggest reason is resource.
Yeah.
I think if it were, if you break it down to simpler times where we all lived in villages,
yeah,
there's a couple of reasons why you'd either be invaded or you'd invade. The biggest one is they've got something you want.
Yeah.
Whether it be food, shelter, weapons, women, children, men. I don't know.
Yeah.
It could also be from from a security point of view. So you fear the next village. I get that. But why do you fear them? Because they might come and take your stuff. So really, that goes back to protecting your stuff and protecting yourself.
Yeah.
But we'll put that down as two different things. So there's resources and then there's security.
Yeah.
Do you think there's more? I personally struggle with making, we'll call it religion, but a belief system, an idealism, whatever, a reason. I always think that's sort of a logical layer that sits above those first two very primal primitive layers, those physical layers, if you will.
Yeah.
You, I think, would actually put that as one of the key reasons as to, that's ground zero. That's one of the base reasons why we have conflict.
Yeah. I think also I add in the mix power as well from an individual level.
So control.
Yeah, control.
So
which I guess is security, really, because if you have security over a resource, you can do what you want with that, and that's control.
Yeah.
Be that.
Which boils it down to, again, it's security and security. It's resource protection.
Yes. Yeah.
It's resources and protecting those resources, which is protecting yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Pretty much.
So, from there, then, you could almost, if you follow that could answer. My belief is that can answer all of your questions.
Yeah.
So, what are they fighting over? What are these conflicts over? Would you agree that a lot of, that if you keep boiling it down and breaking it down, all conflict is going to be over some form of resource and protection of that resource?
Then you've got to do like a stakeholder analysis. Who's involved? Who benefits from X happening or Y happening? How do they benefit?
Yeah. And what did they get?
Yeah. What did
Which is how do they benefit?
Yeah. Because no country or no group will go to war purely because of the goodness of its heart of liberating people like in Bosnia.
Well, there's always something for something.
Yeah. There's always a reason. Yeah, and usually it's like a resource. It's a resource. And I think power can be a resource as well.
It could be for something. So if you're allies with a village, if we break it down, if we use the village analogy again, if you've got village X that attacks village A, but village A is very good allies with village B. They kind of get on. They know they're not a threat to each other. They have enough resources to keep themselves alive.
Yeah.
B could defend A against X for, on the basis that I look after you, you look after me.
Yeah, they get something. They get a return.
Which is mutual security.
Yeah. So that's how you birth alliances.
Right. Yeah. You've got it's not an alliance. An alliance. It can be a fake alliance.
Yeah.
But in reality, that if you have an alliance with someone that's sitting on what you want, then it's all. I had a chat with a gentleman once who used to run a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah.
Tenuous link. and we were talking about mergers and acquisitions with him. I was talking about mergers and acquisitions with him, and he said something that was really interesting to me. This is a guy who ran a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah.
He said that there's no such thing as a merger or an acquisition. Well, an acquisition is an acquisition, but there's no such thing as a merger. There's only ever a slow buyout.
yeah.
So it'd have to be pretty level, pretty mutual for it to be a genuine alliance.
Yeah. And would any group or party really want to truly be level pegging? Probably not. They'd always want some edge to, just in case they do something a bit.
And that's a key word, just in case. You never quite know what when you're sleeping is the other village that you apparently have an alliance with. Certainly an enemy, but they might come and cut your throat in the night.
Yeah.
So it's fear.
Paranoia. Yeah.
It's security. It's I think the basis of everything is resources and security.
Or insecurity, because that's what births the action.
But call it what you will, but it's what leads to conflict.
Yeah. I think we've just put the world to right.
I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Until next time.
Yeah.
Steve,
Right,
next time.